Right. Let's dive straight into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really groundbreaking framework from Dr. Bichara Sahely that completely reimagines how we actually measure the health of our societies. For decades, we've leaned on metrics like GDP or just the sheer absence of armed conflict to tell us if a nation is doing okay. But this concept, life-coherent peace, argues that those scorecards are, frankly, dangerously incomplete. It offers a totally new paradigm for human and planetary flourishing. Because we often just assume that if there's no war, we have peace. But really, is a society actually peaceful if its ecosystems are actively collapsing around it? Think about it for a second. A nation might be totally free of bombs, yet still tolerate widespread hunger, preventable disease, profound loneliness, and massive ecological contamination. So the guns might be silent, but life itself is still being actively disabled. To figure that out, we're going to hit 5 key areas today. First, moving beyond just the absence of war. Second, the biology of value. Third, the architecture of violence. Fourth, building the civil commons. And finally, resolving competing life needs.
So, kicking things off as Section 1, beyond the absence of war, and rethinking our entire definition of peace.
The absolute crucial point here is that peace isn't just about not dropping bombs on each other, it's actually the active, systemic organization of conditions that allow life to flourish. The author introduces this idea of life-coherent peace. Basically, it means our institutions, our economies, and our whole culture shouldn't just avoid active combat. They need to be deliberately designed to conserve and expand the capacities of living beings. That means people, communities, species, the whole planetary shebang. It's peace as organized life enablement.
And this massive paradigm shift synthesizes 3 major thinkers into one shared grammar of life coherence. We're pulling together John McMurtry, who defines what is truly valuable, Humberto Maturana, who gives us the biological understanding of how living systems actually survive, and Johan Galtung, who provides a diagnostic grammar for invisible violence. Put them all together, and you've got the ultimate blueprint for flourishing.
Moving right along to Section 2, the biology of value, diving into John McMurtry and Humberto Maturana's insights.
To really grasp this blueprint, we kind of have to toss out our old notions of value. John McMurtry fundamentally shifts our perspective here. He argues that true value is simply whatever expands our capacity to think, feel, and act in the world. So value isn't just some subjective preference, and it's definitely not just a market price. Good is literally whatever enables life to become more inclusive and flourishing, whether that's through learning something new, feeling joy, or taking creative action. On the flip side, disvalue is anything that shrinks life, deadens feeling, or destroys the very conditions we need to survive. This contrast is seriously the ultimate aha moment. We're essentially looking at 2 completely different operating systems for society. On one hand, we've got the life sequence. Here, life is the ultimate goal, and we use means, like water, food, shelter, to generate more and better life. Pretty straightforward, right? But on the other hand, we have our current ruling system, the money sequence. Here, money is the beginning and the end. Under this system, human labor, fragile ecosystems, even illness, they all just become tools, mere means, to multiply private money. When a society is governed by this money sequence, it becomes entirely life-blind. It'll happily count transactions as growth, even if those exact transactions are actively destroying living beings and ecosystems.
Now, to understand why these means of life are absolutely critical, we turn to Humberto Maturana's concept of autopoiesis. I know, big word, but it basically reveals that living beings aren't just passive consumers or workers. We are self-producing networks that require constant, ongoing environmental harmony. We don't just exist, we have to continuously regenerate ourselves, and we can only pull that off if we have a viable relationship with our environment.
So depriving someone of clean water or a safe environment isn't just some abstract political debate. It actively damages our structural coupling. It essentially breaks down the core biological relationship between a human being and their world. Think about the reciprocal interactions going on. We are intrinsically coupled to our medium, air, water, food, sure, but also meaning, education, and community. If a society degrades those conditions, it's not just a bad policy. It is biologically damaging the organism-environment relationship that makes life possible in the first place.
Which brings us to Section 3, the architecture of violence, and Johan Galtung's diagnostic grammar.
This fundamental biological need really forces us to completely redefine what violence is. Johan Galtung gives us this incredibly detailed diagnostic grammar, showing us that harm goes way, way beyond just physical attacks. His violence matrix maps out exactly how different forms of harm disable our fields of life, our thought, our felt being, our action. It's a tool that helps us spot the invisible structures causing very real biological and psychological damage.
To distill all that down, just think of it like this. Violence basically comes in three forms. Direct violence is the obvious stuff, right? Assault, visible injury. But structural violence is built right into our social arrangements. For instance, a child developing asthma because heavy diesel traffic is deliberately routed through a low-income neighborhood, that is a textbook example of structural violence. That child's life capacity is being contracted by a social structure, even though there's no visible, direct attacker throwing a punch.
And then cultural violence steps in to legitimize that structural harm through language. It turns living, breathing entities into disposable abstractions. The words we use actually participate in creating a world where disabling life seems totally normal, necessary, or just efficient. If we casually call a heavily polluted river an externality, we mentally erase the violence being done to that entire ecosystem and to the people who rely on it.
Let's look at how we fix this in Section 4, Building the Civil Commons, or Love Institutionalized at a Social Scale.
So how do we actually fix this life-blind organization? Well, it starts with what Maturana defines as love. Now hold on, we are not talking about romantic sentiment or private affection here. It is the fundamental baseline acceptance that the other person's life is just as legitimate as your own. Without this specific relational domain, society inevitably slips into domination, fear, and rivalry. You simply can't build a life-enabling society from a place that denies the legitimacy of other living beings.
We take that relational legitimacy and we institutionalize it by building what McMurtry calls the civil commons. Think of it as a social immune system that protects our universal access to life goods. Because let's face it, private charity just isn't enough in massively complex societies. We need durable infrastructures, public health, public education, ecological protection, democratic law. These form a protective shield, making sure that our basic life necessities aren't just left to the absolute mercy of private purchasing power.
A public system isn't just some cold, faceless bureaucracy. When it's designed correctly, a clean municipal water system is society's way of explicitly declaring that your body and your life inherently matter. These shared infrastructures are the physical, real-world expression of that concept of love we just talked about. But, and this is a big but, the paper notes they must remain democratic and accountable. Because if a civil commons becomes rigid or humiliating, it completely stops being a life-enabling relation and just starts reproducing structural violence all over again. Finally, Section 5, Resolving Competing Life Needs and the Problem of Tragic Choice.
Okay, but what actually happens when different life-enabling claims clash with one another out in the real world? We end up facing tragic choices, like choosing between housing displaced people and protecting an ancient forest that sustains critical planetary biodiversity. Both sides are invoking a genuine need for life, right? We can't just dismiss either one as a mere preference. And we certainly can't solve it by just slapping a monetary price tag on the forest and selling it off to the highest bidder. That would be falling straight back into that life-blind money sequence.
Instead of just forcing a sacrifice from one vulnerable group or throwing money at the problem, we can use the Life Coherence Arbitration Protocol. It's a disciplined, step-by-step method to navigate these exact kinds of conflicts. It means mapping out exactly whose life capacities are affected, strictly separating absolute universal needs from discretionary wants, and making sure all affected voices actually get a say in the dialogue. It's essentially a method to prevent life value from turning into some top-down, technocratic command system. The ultimate goal of this explainer, and really this entire framework, is to move us away from life-blind extraction and toward a secular covenant for life on Earth. In our forest dilemma, composable flourishing might mean finding temporary non-forest shelter, using regenerative building materials, and doing some serious participatory planning. The aim is to conserve the absolute maximum amount of life capacity for everyone involved, including the ecosystem itself, with the absolute minimum avoidable harm.
I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder next time you look around your own community and the metrics we use to govern our lives. Are the systems you interact with every single day enabling your thought, your feeling, and your action, or are they silently contracting them? Life-Coherent Peace shows us that a better, truly flourishing world is entirely possible, but we have to make the conscious choice to organize our society around life rather than just settling for the absence of war.